Good morning, guys. It's Joe with Tradger Farms. I'm a whitetail habitat specialist with Whitetail Habitat Solutions alongside Jeff and the gang. Hope you guys are doing well today. It's a pretty nice day. It's a low wind out here doing some spraying, but I wanted to talk to you guys today about foundation of movement and really how we can get the deer to give us the best opportunity when hunting season comes. And that could be numerous different ways, and I want to give you some examples, but ultimately the goal is to give us the best opportunity to get a shot off, and really create a plan that is going to have the deer moving where we want them to the majority of the time. But before we get more into that, I want to show you a quick couple examples. I know I've been kind of bringing you guys along with my cuttings that I've been doing this year, and you can see some of the poplar there and two willow. You can actually see all four, but if you can see the weed barrier on the ground in our netting here, it has worked very well. I would say one of the things, if I could go back and maybe change it, I was very specific with this kind of star layout of the weed barrier. And, you can still see how there is so many weeds, especially in dense areas. Now I have plenty of other areas back there where the weeds just aren't as bad. It's not as thick of just a growth area, depending on what's in your seed bed. But in an area where let's say you get good undergrowth and stuff coming up, early successional growth, then you might want to, just do more of a simple pattern, just laying down a few strips in kind of a block, put your cuttings in. It does not be as specific. I spent a lot of time kind of laying this out to get my most, bang for my buck and spreading it out because I'm fencing it and so on. But if I could go back, that is one change that I would make if it helps you guys, if you plan on doing that maybe in the spring or even a little bit this fall. But the trees do look good, and for those of you that haven't been following along, these four in the middle here are 6-foot cuttings, and they were hybrid poplar and hybrid willow, and you can see they're doing very well. And the reason they're so tall again is really because they were 6-foot cuttings to start. We put them 18 or so inches into the ground, and they should look like small trees that first year, and they will be growing very quickly, potentially up to 12 feet per year, but I think that would be kind of a rare circumstance. But it's good to see most of these living. I wanted to show you this kind of example really quick with the thick weeds coming in and kind of why I would make those changes. But I'll show you guys a different pocket maybe over there, if you can see that, where the trees are still looking good, but there's just not as much weed growth, so they're taking off. I do also have the smaller cuttings on the legs of these little stars, and some of them are growing and some of them got shaded out by some of the weeds, so it's kind of a half and half. But we got a lot to do today, a lot to talk about, so I'm not going to go walking around each pocket. But I hope that helps for any of you that have been curious about that. Here, guys, is a pocket that just doesn't have as much weeds and early successional growth coming up around it. You can clearly see the 2 poplars and 2 willows in the middle doing very good. The nets are holding up very well for just $15 Tractor Supply nets around these T-posts. And then the smaller cuttings, you can see a bunch of them are making it and a couple of them have died. So, it's a mixture. We didn't expect 100% success. I can see some making it over there, possibly over there, a little willow. So ultimately not too bad, but again, I think maybe just kind of blocking off a section instead of doing this star pattern, if you will, might have made things more simple, might have saved a little time, and really I don't think you would have spent much more money unless you were going to totally cover a 30-foot area, which isn't really necessary. It just depends how big you want to make these fences and how many you want to maybe spread out in an area. So hope that helps. All right, now back to the subject matter for today, the foundation of movement. Guys, when we are trying to focus deer in on certain areas, there's numerous ways that can help us get them from one location to the next. And really, it's almost like the more the merrier, but at the same time, you can really dilute these patterns by adding stuff in areas that aren't as important. For example, Jeff Sturgis used to talk about mock scrapes and how, some properties would have way too many, 100 mock scrapes, 200 mock scrapes. When the mock scrapes that are important, the ones near our stand locations, are then kind of diluted because now the deer just have a plethora of different scrapes all over your property. And so one way to think about it is simply, a mock scrape at one tree stand location and a mock scrape at another tree stand location. Maybe they're going from bedding out to food. Okay. And now along their normal daily route, when they're going to be leaving their bedding, maybe going to that third feeding of the day out in food, they kind of establish a pattern, a foundation of movement, if you will, and they're going to naturally want to touch those scrapes. Again, like we usually say, those scrapes, guys, they're not meant to draw in deer from a mile or two. It's not what they are. They're not like food per se. The scrape is just something where if they're going to be taking, let's say, 2 different routes within a smaller distance, they're going to ultimately probably choose the one where they're going to want to touch that scrape, communicate with their deer, rub their preorbital glands on it. And when we have that within shooting distance of our stand or our blind, well, that's the whole point. So we definitely don't want to add any other mock scrapes outside of the ones that are at our stand and blind locations. And B, it's going to help to connect those features as we have laid out, because each stand or blind, we should have a dedicated spot to be blowing our wind. So if the deer are kind of just doing whatever they want, wherever they want, you're going to have a lot more times where the deer are going to get bumped. They're going to, smell you, and you're going to lose that opportunity. So the more we can get them going in a certain direction on a certain side in a certain area, the better we're going to be. Especially when, maybe on the other side or a different spot we're going to be accessing from. And ultimately we don't want them crossing that area where we are leaving our scent. Another way would be simply a path of least resistance. So you guys can kind of see here, I have my buckwheat. Today I am doing a bunch of my spraying before we're going to put our fall seed down. The buckwheat, I would say, came in kind of mediocre. I have some other spots where it's great, and I have some spots that actually look worse. If you remember last year, personally, I did ask a friend to come and help me lightly disc things up, just because I could not get rid of some of the weeds with the amount of time that I have to spend here. So that does kick up, some weed seeds. And if you guys are trying to do the no-till method and you end up, disking or utilizing a tiller, then you are going to be going backwards a little bit, just because it's going to get harder and harder instead of better and better each year. However, so with that being, let's say, food in between switchgrass, or let's say an opening within a tree line, you are establishing something that is very easy for the deer to walk, where maybe, walking through thick, dense forest or very tall switchgrass that doesn't have a trail through it, it's just going to be a little more cumbersome for them. They still will, especially in high pressure areas where they don't want to be seen, but if we can have an opening for them to utilize and make it easy for them, and they feel secluded, which is why we have switchgrass on both sides here of the food plot, they can still get that sense of security and they can move along, and I can get an opportunity over here in my blind. And that's an area that I also should have a mock scrape hanging, and in the next couple weeks I will. So now we have a path of least resistance, we have a mock scrape. Other examples could be a water hole. Now at food locations, we don't really need a water hole, but maybe a transition like this from bedding to food in a longer route. Now this will be food, so it's not a perfect example, but maybe somewhere we were just mowing a path of least resistance, a water hole could be a perfect spot. For sure back in bedding areas like in morning locations, but also in those transition areas where deer are going to be going to and from bedding to food. So that's a third example. And the last one I'm probably going to leave you guys with is a path of least resistance via mowing, like through switchgrass. So you have this tall, thick stuff, and I'm going to have some examples on the far side of the farm where I'm not going to have food. I'm just going to have early successional growth and switchgrass and things like that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the mower and I'm going to guide the deer through this stuff on how I want them to get through and around my blind or stand. Again, in the area where I'm not going to be blowing my scent, the area I'm not going to be accessing through. So it's going to be purposefully bringing the deer along the same foundation of movement, and it's going to be giving me my best opportunity while blowing my scent and accessing a different area. I really love, guys, taking thick areas, and whether it's in the woods and you're using a forestry mulcher and blasting through, or whether it's switchgrass and you can simply mow it or brush hog it, it'll come back the next year. It's great. You can still maintain your stand. You can still change it the next year if you want to. If you want to tweak it, I'm big on that. And then the last thing I'll really leave you guys with, those are great examples of establishing, again, that pattern, that foundation of movement and tools we can utilize. But when it comes to width, okay, when you are in the big woods, you know, you're in huge national forests, thousands of acres. The deer are used to that space. There still might be some thick areas, but they're vast sections of woods. There's not a house every 20 feet. And they're okay, you know, having a little bit more space when they move. If you start to restrict them, okay, in an area like that where they only have, you know, 3 feet, 4 feet to get by, and they just feel too confined, they're not used to that, you might notice they're a little skittish. So if you're in an area like that, and let's say you're making an opening for your blind or stand location and it's super small, then it's not going to be super advantageous. They're going to feel confined, like they can't escape. We talk about escape routes a lot, and they might not use that as much. You might actually be deterring them and not bringing them in. Whereas an area that, let's say, is like Ohio, and you have a ton of ag and they're used to just piling into the most dense, secure stuff, you might be able to get away with a little smaller, you know, gap in a fence row and stuff like that, where the deer can just shimmy through it. They're used to it. You know, they're kind of just used to being in those confined spaces. So I try to take a mixed approach. I'm personally in kind of a mixed ag, you know, wooded area. So I don't want them too small, but I also don't want them too big. It should be essentially within shooting distance from me to shoot from one end to the other that way. And so no matter what, they have enough room to get through, but I'll also be able to have a shot opportunity to be able to see the deer coming out of the switchgrass, which sometimes, guys, if you're not used to that yet, they can just appear out of nowhere. So it's good to have a little bit of a buffer to get their eye, see if it's gonna be, you know, a deer that you wanna take, and get your shot off. It also makes it a little easier because you don't need to clear a million shooting lanes or just spend, you know, a bunch of hours doing that. So I hope that, guys, helps. Again, the video mainly was for foundation of movement. So use these tips to establish how you want the deer moving. You might be able to incorporate a couple of these or maybe all of them, depending on your certain situation. If you get any questions, you want me to dive deeper into something, please leave a question in the comments below, and we will see you guys next time.